Welcome. My name is Natasha Sherman and I am your host. And my guest today is Monona Rossol. She is a chemist, an artist, and an industrial hygienist. She's also the president of ACTS, Arts, Crafts, and Theater Safety, which is committed to keeping people in the arts safe. And she's also the author of a book called Pick Your Poison: How Our Mad Dash to Chemical Utopia is Making Lab Rats of Us All. So as I read the book, I started to be overwhelmed with what it was that I didn't know that I should know that's impacting me in my everyday life. So I invited Monona to come and talk about whatever she thinks it's most important for us to know. Her lifetime of knowledge in a half hour. Welcome.
Thank you.
So I am delighted that you're here. And as I said, I wasn't even sure where to start because there's so much information that we don't know, from the chemicals in our cosmetics to our floor tiles to mislabeling to misleading labeling to laws that we don't understand. So what's most important for us to know?
I think the most important thing is to understand that the manufacturers who are selling the products to us also don't know. They literally have not done testing of the majority of the chemicals that we are exposed to. We seem to think that somebody knows, somebody's tested, that they couldn't put non-toxic on a product if they didn't know, but actually this is not true. Since the beginning of the Industrial Revolution, there has only been two steps to development. Discover something, find a market for it. There's nothing else. So we always work with something for a while, and then we maybe find a body count, and then we say, oops, there's something wrong, then we test. So no one tests prior to the chemical coming out. Now they might test for what are called acute hazards. In other words, if you put it on your skin and it burns a hole.
Immediately.
Yes, so that you see it right away. You get it in your eye, you go blind. Those are things that we can make it a quick association with. So they may know something like that, but whether it causes cancer, birth defects, reproductive, developmental, organ damage over time, any of the chronic things, the majority of the chemicals that we use have not been evaluated. And that's what we need to understand. So in the United States, untested equals non-toxic.
I have to stop you there. Say that again.
Untested equals non-toxic.
So they can put it on there and say it's non-toxic.
And they do, because you can't prove their chemical is toxic. And under the way our laws are set up, a chemical is assumed to be innocent until proven guilty, and we don't take them to trial until there is a reason. So that's why you keep getting these depressing things. Oh my gosh, now they're finding that's a carcinogen. We've been using that for years. It's because it's never been tested. And I could go over story after story after story of chemicals that we used for 100 years. No testing, nothing until we find out, oh, oops, that's a problem. So this is what we're doing, and now we're adding all the new chemicals.
Right.
And we're adding them at a terrific pace. So in Europe, things are different. They operate all their laws based on the precautionary principle, which says if there's no data, you can't assume the chemical is safe. Not only that, they actually tell people when it hasn't been tested.
Oh, they tell people?
Well, their safety data sheet does that. They have every product has a safety data sheet that is supposed to tell you more about it than the label. The ones in the United States don't bother. They're really pretty bad.
So I have a question to ask you, and it may be an unanswerable question, but why are they doing it and we are not? What is missing in our thinking that is present in theirs?
We want business to operate without fetters. We base our economy on cutting the costs for industry so they can just keep developing new this, new that, and the other. The rest of the world looked at that and said, are you people over here nuts? And so they changed their laws. When they did change their law, they set up a program called REACH, which stands for Registration Authorization of Chemical Substances, and Evaluation of Chemical Substances. And they started to actually demand testing because we don't. That was during the Bush administration, and the Bush administration sent all kinds of people to the European Union to try to block that and to try to talk them out of it. And they went ahead and did it anyway because they know what we should all know, because it's nothing what I'm saying is hidden. It's all there. You want to Google, you'll find out everything I'm saying is so. There's a group called the Chemical Abstract Service. They register every new chemical as it's invented. They look through patents, through catalogs, through research papers, and every time they say, oops, that's a new chemical, they assign it a number, and that's its database number. It's a good thing to know for consumers as well,
right?
Because when you pick up a can of paint, if your kids just swallowed it, and you see the CAS numbers, it's far better to be telling the people on poison control what those numbers are than to try to be pronouncing methyl ethyl death.
Right.
You know, so those are good numbers, and they are now up to 90 million individual chemicals.
90 million
90
individual.
million.
Are these man-made chemicals or
Well, some of them have been isolated from the biggest chemical manufacturer of all, which is Mother Nature.
Right.
Okay, but they are individual, separate, unique chemical entities.
Right.
Okay. 28 million of those 90 million are currently available for catalog purchase worldwide. You can get those right now, any one of those 28 million.
And none of them have been researched as to whether they're...
The International Agency for Research in Cancer, which looks at all the data and decides when we can absolutely say something is a carcinogen, has evaluated in the range of 1,000 chemicals.
1,000 chemicals
Versus
out of
28 million.
That you can get in a catalog.
Right. Mm-hmm. So when Europe looked at that and said that no testing is required, they just said something has to be done. So what they did is they required manufacturers to register the chemicals that they were going to use in the EU. Now, they only registered chemicals that were manufactured in amounts over a ton a year. So there's probably small amounts of various chemicals that are not. But they, in 2008, they were up to 143,000. And then they looked at that 143,000, and of those, 30,000 were high production volume chemicals. That means over 1,000 tons a year they're manufactured in with no data. No data. So they said, those are the ones you're going to have to test first. If you want to use them after 18 in the UK, you're going to have to come up with some chronic data,
Right.
or you can't use them. We're not doing that.
And we resisted doing
And we're
it.
resisting doing that. And in fact, our answer is much simpler. What our industries do is substitute a different chemical for the one that they think might be a bad actor. We're being fooled by that.
So it's a similar chemical.
A similar chemical will do the same thing, but now there's no data, so you can't ban it. So that's the people, for instance, trying to ban BPA are wasting their resources, their time, and their money, because there's already BPS, BPC, BPF, and it's very simple to make a bisphenol chemical with a different chemical in the middle of it, and it'll function the same, and they're just
And
replacing,
do the same damage.
and it'll probably have the same hazards. But you can't prove it. So in this country, you don't have to label it. So when you see bisphenol A free, you've gotten nowhere.
So you've gotten one tiny little thing.
You got
out
one
of a
chemical
large
out of probably
possibility.
1,000 possibilities out.
So A, non-toxic doesn't mean squat. B, what about hypoallergenic?
That was a term that was regulated for at least 20 minutes.
Okay.
Because what happened was FDA set up a really good rule, because there are standard tests for what is called sensitization that will tell whether a chemical will cause allergy in a significant numbers of mice or whatever they're using as the test example, or even people. They can do some data on that as well with patch tests and other things. So they set up a whole nice thing, and it was all the cosmetics industry just jumped all over FDA and took them to court and made such trouble that the law went away. The only regulation that applies to that term hypoallergenic now is that it can't contain natural rubber, because natural rubber coming from a tree is a hell of a sensitizer and has caused so much problems in rubber gloves and all the stuff that's being used.
So anyone can put hypoallergenic and it means
you
nothing.
You and I could get together and make our own line of cosmetics, and just for fun, we'll mix a little poison ivy in there just to really get them. And we can put hypoallergenic on that cosmetic. Nobody can stop us.
So everything on our labeling means nothing for the most part.
Pretty much. And it's misinterpreted. Sometimes it means something, but we misinterpret what it really means.
Right.
There's a really good one out there called VOC. You'll see a number of how much VOCs is in it. Well, VOC stands for volatile organic compound. Well, shouldn't that apply to all of the solvents? They're volatile, they're organic, being based on carbon, and they're certainly chemicals. So people are buying paints that say no VOCs or low VOCs, thinking they're doing a good thing and that they're not being exposed to toxic solvents. Nothing could be further from the truth.
What are they being exposed to?
That VOC is an EPA term, and its definition is this: any volatile organic chemical that will react in the atmosphere with sunlight to create smog. If your chemical doesn't do that,
Doesn't create smog.
now you can put a no VOC label on. You could take a can of acetone and put a no VOC label on it, because acetone doesn't do that. And it has to be listed by EPA. There is a chemical that does cause smog called 2-butoxyethanol, and I can tell you every one of your viewers is exposed to it, because it's in everything. It's in all of the latex paints. It's in fantastic 409 Windex Simple Green. I don't care what we're talking about, if it's a fast cleaner or if it's a polymer product that's liquid or an emulsion, it's got some of this or a related chemical in it, or it won't work. So industry went to EPA and said, we know this is a listed VOC, but we can't make anything without it. We really need it. EPA pulled it off the list. It is now not a VOC. Now we could have a can of this highly toxic, skin-absorbing, nasty solvent that the number of people say is also a carcinogen, and put a no VOC label on it. So people misinterpret. They don't. All you have to do is Google what VOC really means. You can find that out for yourself. This is not so hard. But people want to believe I'm doing a good thing.
Yeah. Well, not only that, it's that there's so many things we have to think about, from our food to our water to this to that. People just want to trust that we're being taken care of, which is the biggest mistake in the world.
Right. If the first thing you learn is not to trust, you've already gone half the way to the end, because that's the first thing. Who believes the person selling them the object? I mean, if they believe that, there's a car I'd like to talk to them all about. You know, you don't do that. If they're selling it, you know they've got a reason.
They have a vested interest.
They have a vested interest in that label. They've got a vested interest in that copy that they're writing about that product. Don't believe it. You get a second opinion even from your physician.
Right. So then my question is, and then I want to go back to some household things that we should actually be concerned about, probably most of them. But what is it that on a day-to-day basis, because on a day-to-day basis, and I'm someone who's pretty careful, I read labels and everything else, but you know, there are one or two things I don't understand, and I go, oh, must be okay, and it's not. So is there anything, and what should we be doing?
Well, there's some general things you can do. First of all, if it makes a powder and it gets in the air, this is a bad thing. We were designed to breathe air. So if you're putting dust or any particle into your lung, that's a bad idea. So you don't want to do things that are going to be creating dust. And if you are creating dust, you want to find a way not to be snorting it. So if
even like sanding
things, working with powdered materials, you know.
Talcum powder.
Well, there's a huge new study out on talcum powder. Oh, you should read this study. It looks like most of the cosmetic talcs are probably contaminated with asbestos. And we're seeing mesothelioma in people who are using cashmere bouquet for years. It's a nice paper. It's in the International Journal of Occupational and Environmental Health. If you really want it, you can Google it.
So
and see it.
asbestos is not gone.
Oh, not by a long shot.
So it's not like we're looking at these old cases and we're trying to prove, oh my God, this guy died because he used asbestos 20 years ago, whatever. You're saying it's in our products now.
It's still around. You bet it is. And the EPA tried to ban it, and it was banned again for about 20 minutes, and then industry reversed that ban.
So the EPA is relatively meaningless then, because
all of the agencies are. Okay. Because they all meant something in the 70s. In the 70s, they were actually able to do some things. But there is this party that believes that you can have a safe world without regulation. I think you know who I mean. And they think that we can just control those agencies who are in our way and making life difficult for us.
Right, by actually wanting us to follow some rules.
Yeah, I mean, the Consumer Product Safety Commission is down to 2 guys in a garage, and EPA is just a bunch of people doing, and they're all people trying to do their best. You know, government you don't have to be afraid of, and most of them are just people trying to do a good job. And nobody goes into government to make $1 million, and none
right.
of us, you know. So basically, most of the people that I deal
are
with in government are well-meaning, but they have no laws. They have no. The Toxic Substance Control Act that EPA administers says EPA can force industry to study an unstudied chemical if they can prove, usually to a court, because the industry is going to take them to a court, that that chemical poses a significant hazard. How do you prove something is a significant hazard if there's no data?
And why were you allowed to use it without testing it?
And
so
all
we're
of
back
the,
full
yeah.
circle.
No, full.
So then, okay, so on an everyday basis, anything that's going to create nanoparticles and that you're going to breathe in, and I like the way you described it, we're meant to breathe in air, not dust, dirt, chemicals, etc.
Right.
What else should we be paying attention to?
Well, the solvents, the ones that evaporate off, they call it outgassing, but what it is that they are volatile chemicals that are evaporating from that product. If that's what's happening, you really want to have some ventilation, because none of those things, there's no minimum daily requirement for any of them, and certainly not by inhalation. So
when you unpack this furniture, put together yourself, blah, 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 and you open the box and it's like, the fumes hit you, but you've bought
not
it.
Fumes. We'll use the right term. They're the vapors and gases, probably.
The vapors and gases, okay. So you have this smell, and you go, whoa. What is it that you should do?
Well, there is no relationship between odor and toxicity.
Ah.
Yeah. You can't. If you can't identify the odor, that doesn't mean it's bad for you. There are things that stink to high heaven that won't hurt you. There are things we like the smell of that are bad for us. You can't judge. But if you open that box and you smell mold, now you've identified it. And those are gases and vapors created by the growing nasty little chlorophyll-less plants. And those things are going to give you problems over time with sensitization or allergy problems or something on that order. Or if you say, I packed this box and now I smell paint thinner because the paints are off-gassing or something unscrewed and got in and spilled in there, then you've identified it. Now you know it's toxic and what it is. But if you really don't know what that odor is at all, common sense says, well, don't breathe a lot of it. But you don't really know for sure. Mm-hmm. So that's why air testing and checking out and trying to trace back and find out what that substance is a really good idea. But when in doubt, if there's an odor, stay away from it till you do identify it.
What about, there's all sorts of stuff for children, plastic toys, what is it that we need to do to keep them safe?
Yeah. Well,
or is that
if
possible?
I was a mother,
yes,
and let's say I understood a few things, like food dyes, maybe there's a problem with some of them, and so you want to maybe cut them out or at least have few of them. Well, when they give you the child's paint set, what are those colors? I mean, they're not even FDA food dyes, but they're colorants, they're dyes and pigments. Something should tell that mother, oops, there's color there. This is not, something I want the kid to eat and get all over their skin. we break down the very inhibitions that children naturally have. We do things in schools that upset that, such as teaching finger painting. If you've ever taught finger painting, you know you put this stuff all out on the table and the kids come in and then you tell them what it is you want them to do. And there's always at least two, usually girls, who will back off and say, ugh, they're the smart ones. Those are the ones who have an innate understanding that you don't want to put your hands in this stuff. Now, those colorants in those paints are trade secrets.
So we don't know what's in
the
them.
colorants in Crayola crayons are all trade secrets. Now, I don't know about you, but when I was young, if it wasn't for crayons, I'd have gone hungry as a child. So, you know, a mother should be able to actually find out what those colors are.
And she can't, right?
She cannot find out. So if you don't know, and if you knew what I know as a chemist, that those are very complex organic chemicals for the most part, damn, I don't want my child getting them all over their skin, putting their fingers in their mouth, eating their lunch, breaking out the cookies and juice in the art room. Oh, please. There are certain things we should be common sense thinking about. And when they don't identify something, when something is a trade secret and you can't find out what it is, don't abuse it. Don't treat it like it's nothing, because it may well be something.
You know, I'm thinking when my children were young, and you know, the paint and all over the place. I seem to have read in the book where in senior homes, nursing homes, where they're having them work with clay and
glazes
and whatever.
China, yeah.
That those are also dangerous.
Right, because clay starts out nice and wet and is fun to handle and all the rest. There are two problems with it. One is, well, just put it on a piece of paper and take it off and you'll see it's creating something that dries quickly and becomes a dust. So good cleanup is very important. Plus there's another problem that I didn't cover in the book. But when you have children working with the clay, and then they collect the clay and put it in a bin, and then they go the next day and they dig out clay, you've just got a nice wet medium exchange for bacteria and viruses and all kinds of pathogens. Because you don't want to be recycling that stuff that people have played with. And in nursing homes and in hospitals,
oh my God, yes.
We don't want people with diseases and with problems working with a wet medium that will exchange bacteria and viruses very healthily between people. So there's that issue. The glazes also, you know, when they're fired, they are colors. That happens because there's certain metals in there. Cadmium, chromium, manganese. You got to realize that there may be a problem. And many of the China paints are based on lead. So we see lead poisoning issues and so on. And I think in the book I mentioned there were actually 2 deaths in nursing homes. Non-toxic, lead-free glazes. That's how they were labeled.
Right.
And because they were China painting, they put them in the little medicine cups and people were painting that. Well, sooner or later people, I think there were over 300 accidents in 1 year where somebody socks them down. And they never tested the people who socked them down because they said, well, it says it's non-toxic and it says it's no lead. Well, these 2 people died. And then they started actually testing a couple of these people who had ingested them, and sure enough, their blood leads shot up.
What about dinnerware?
Well,
How
don't
do we
eat off an antique dinnerware. I'll tell you that right now, because there are FDA rules about how much you're supposed to leach out of your plates and so on. And most of the big companies are pretty good at that. But we don't control our imports anymore. And there was a reporter from LA called me a few years ago, and she had gone to Target and bought 6 similar white dishes and then sent them all to a lab for standard FDA leach tests for lead. 4 of them flunked. And she said, how can that be? And I says, who's watching the borders? Who's checking anything? FDA in the port of New York may do as many as 300 tests a year.
You know, we're almost at the end of our time, and it's like stunningly shocking. So I invite people, what you suggested, educate yourself. We can't escape these products, so we have to use them.
Use common sense about not getting exposure and not doing dumb things, and we really can't.
And not trusting,
that
the manufacturers have your best interests at heart.
That's right. They don't. They have
Yeah.
their best interests.
Yeah.
So we have to step up and make sure that happens. And I think very gently getting your kids to understand not to trust is really the smart move, because they're the ones that are going to make this change. You and I, we really can't get out there and pick it anymore. We need those young people to understand this issue and make this happen, because in the final thing, the manufacturer has to sell the product.
You know, I said to you as we were talking earlier, people can't even get a law passed that they want their food labeled with what's in their food, whether it's GMO or non-GMO. We can't, I mean, there's something insane about all of this. And to be able to think that, okay, the chemicals are not going away, but we can have some
Input. We
Yes.
can force them to, you know, if we could just say to Crayola or any of the manufacturers, look, my child is working with this, I need to know what it is. If enough people say that, they're going to take another look at that issue. But if you don't, if everybody just accepts, well, it's okay.
Crayola.
It's Crayola.
It's been around
They've
all
been
those
around
years.
all those
Yeah.
years. But what are we looking at? Childhood cancer's going up, Alzheimer's, we're looking at we're looking at a lot of things we don't understand, and we keep putting more and more chemicals we don't understand in our bodies.
Yeah.
Why don't we just say, look, let's get the cards out on the table. Let's just find
speak
out
up
what
and be
these
a
are.
demand
And
for
demand.
transparency. Yeah.
Absolutely.
Yeah.
Tell us what it is.
We're at the end of our time. Thank you so much. And I invite people to check out the book, really, because there's so much information in there. And it's just a reminder that we have to start trusting ourselves.
That's right.
Yeah.
And I do answer email.
Oh, good.
Yes.
So I
Every time.
invite you, if you have questions, get in touch with Monona.
Google the name, it'll all come up.
Awesome. Thank you for joining us. My name is Natasha Sherman.